Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whiskey. My name's VinPF, and on today's episode we've got another Sample Saturday coming to you guys, and this is another one courtesy of Mark Littler. He sent me through that massive amount of samples a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to be covering these most weekends, I guess, but I'm going to sort of try and smatter it out with other things as well, so that I don't just kind of like go nuts on these. But what I did this time round was I actually put this out to my Discord group to vote for which group that they wanted to see me do next. And they voted for the 8-year-old single malts. So here we've got 4 delectable single malts to try, 3 from the 80s and 1 from the 70s. But what we're going to do is pour those out nice and early so that we can leave them to go in the glass a little bit. I'm toying with the idea of doing this off camera, but I quite like the idea of me doing this so that you can see me pour these out. But more importantly, you can see me crack these. But I'll go through these individually, and we'll see what we've got in the glass in a second once I've poured these out. But it's I've been really enjoying exploring these older whiskies, not least because it's a great way of trying whiskey. But a lot of these full bottles still pop up on auctions, but they go for so much money, it's unreal. Apart from this Scapa here, which we'll talk about in a bit. This one here, actually, this Glenfarclas, it did come on its own. So I'm going out on a bit of a limb here and tucking it in with these ones, but it is very different to the other ones, being that it's obviously heavily sherried. The other ones don't seem to be so heavily sherried, but also much more expensive and another decade sooner as well, earlier. Okay, right, so yeah, as I said, we've got 4 8-year-old single malt whiskies here. We've got 3 from the 80s and 1 from the 70s. A good old mixed bag of stuff here. So with the first one, we've got a Glen Mhor 8-year-old, and this one's 40%. These first 3 as well are Gordon MacPhail bottlings, which is interesting, and this last one I think is just a standard bottling, I think, from the Glenfarclas, but we'll get into that a bit later. Glen Mhor is a closed distillery, so that's an interesting one for me. I've never tried anything from there. Then we have the Strathisla 8-year-old, and this one again I think is probably 40%, the old 70% proof. And this was a Strathisla-Glenlivet, it says, which is back to those old Glenlivet things. 70 proof. We talked about proof a little bit earlier on the previous video. Kind of to expand on that a little bit, is that proof in today's terminology is usually used by the Americans, and it's double what is ABV. But when we're talking about the old English proof, it worked out to about 1.75 times ABV. But it's really got nothing to do with the percentage volume. They just call it proof. And then we've got the Scapa distillery 8-year-old. Now this is an interesting one because when I started getting into whiskey, probably sort of 20 odd years ago, I'd never heard of Scapa, but it had closed. In the 90s it had closed and was being kind of used rarely throughout the years, but I had no idea it had such a rich history, so it's going to be really interesting trying that, because I've never tried Scapa liquid from the before times. Finally then we've got a Glenfarclas-Glenlivet 8-year-old. Very confusing with these Glenlivet suffixes, which is, I guess, is why they changed it all and eventually became the Glenlivet. But this one here is 100 proof, which I'm not really sure what that means in truth. I think it's probably, I don't know, I mean it should be 40%, right? But that would lead it to mean that it's definitely not going to be 50% because it's the old English proof, old British proof I should say, sorry. So yeah, is it less than 40 then? I don't know. Interesting one. I have got some information on the different screens here, so I'm going to maybe refer to those as we get into them. But yeah, I know it's not enough time, but I like to waffle on a little bit, but 4 minutes unfortunately is going to have to be all we get. So the first one then, going back again, is the Glen Mhor. Let's have a little sniff there and see what we've got on this. Okay. As always, I do like to have a little sip before I give any notes. Ooh. Well, that's an interesting little drop. I would say it's quite thin on the palate. Okay, so for me, I'm getting a bit of kind of like a beeswax polish note off the nose, along with some almonds. A bit of dried fruits. I would arguably say this is a sherried whiskey. but not overbearingly so. Definitely no sulphur for me, which is good. It's nice. Back to the palate. Yeah, it's got a nice fruity outburst at the front. It's kind of like almost like, yeah, a bit of honey, a bit of vanilla, a bit of heatheriness coming through, a bit of floral. Some kind of raisin elements at the back end. A little bit of it's almost like a boozy raisin, if that makes sense. It doesn't taste like, it's not overbearing in terms of its whiskiness, but if you were eating a raisin that was laden with alcohol, that's kind of the vibe I'm getting off this. Dare I say, a bit Christmas cakey. Yeah, a tidy little drop. It's yeah, it's got a lot of there's a lot going on. It's quite musty and dusty as well, but yeah, I can't escape how the kind of thinness of it, but it's nice, good. Now that one, the Glen Mhor, looking on various websites, there's on the Royal Mile, they last sold it for £345 for a bottle of it, with a very, very low neckline, fill line, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, and then I mean, they make that clear as well. It's a 75 centilitre bottle as well. Interesting. 345 quid though. I mean, obviously, like I've said on previous videos, most people aren't going to be buying these big bottles to open them and drink them, which is why these samples serve such a good purpose, because you get to try these things, you know. And when I send these back to Mark, he'll get to try them as well, which is awesome. Okay, we've had a cleanse, so let's move on to the next one then. So the next one is going to be this Strathisla, 8-year-old, 40%. There's no other information on here apart from where it was bottled and whatnot. Strathisla is still going. Don't know much about the history of Strathisla. I don't think I've ever covered a Strathisla or knowingly tried a bottle of it. But this one here, a bottle of it sold, actually is in stock right now in the whiskyvault.com for 420 including VAT, which is a lot. That's a lot. Let's see what we got. Okay. Decision making is quite similar actually. It's a little bit more wood polish than beeswax polish. Like the Mr. Sheen polishy vibe. There's a wee touch of sherry notes to it, but I mean it's really buried. I mean, incredibly thin on the palate. Very sour. Yeah, not fruity at all, really. I mean, you can tell that it has some sherry influence to it. I'm not sure about the colour of these things, so we can't really talk about that. But I don't know. It's very, very musty. Not really my bag at all, to be honest. It's got a kind of yeah, almost like a mouldy character to it at the back end. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. This is the trouble with this. I mean, the fill line of these all looks great, to be fair, but I can never be sure if what I'm tasting here is actually the liquid from back then, or if it's been tainted in some way. So for me, I would hope that was chalked up to a bit of taint, but it might just be the flavour profile that I'm not into on that one. We'll come back to it at the end and see what's what. Next up then, we've got Scapa, 8-year-old. Again, a 40%. I don't know why they put it twice. 40% volume, which I think is interesting. Distilled at Scapa Distillery. And again, these are all 80s bottlings, which is cool. Let's get into it. Right, so Scapa 8-year-old. This one, interesting, was last sold on Whisky Auctioneer for £84. So, you can get yourself a bargain, I guess. Ooh, interesting. That was really silky, that was. Okay, let's... For me, this is... I think this was some sherry. Let me just have a quick look on the thing. Doesn't actually say. No, doesn't actually say. So I don't think this was, to be honest. Getting vanillas, caramels, some kind of. It's not like, I want to say honey, but it's not like dark honey. It's like almost like manuka honey, like a deeper honey. Definitely some nuttiness on the back end. It doesn't smell like the first one though. No, so it's a different kind of nut, but I'm not sure which. Like those little round ones, I want to say like macadamia nuts or something like that. It's a little bit like that. Okay, I will say so. Again, quite thin on the palate, but I'll tell you what it does do is it coats your whole tongue just like immediately with like a little film of the whiskey, which is not an experience I get all the time. So yeah, it's thin in flavour but good in mouthfeel, which is interesting. Yeah, quite oaky, quite tannic. Not really on the leathery spectrum, it's more on the tobacco side of things. Not particularly fruity, sours out quite deeply towards the back end. Again, not really my kind of cup of tea, but it's a nice enough whiskey. I'd be happy enough to drink that, but I wouldn't want a whole bottle of it, I don't think. Okay. Now, the last one then, again, a bit of an oddball one, because this one did come in on its own, but didn't really want to make a video of it on its own, so I chucked it in with the other 8-year-old. So, this one, genuinely, you've never smelled this before. Glenfarclas, I tend to, like 50-50 whether I get sulphur or not. So, let's see what we get, right? I'm a bit worried now. Oh my god. Okay, that is not what I was expecting to get. Let's try on the palate quickly. God damn. Okay. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that was... Well, it says 100 proof. That tastes like it's 50%. Ooh. I can't say I like it, but let's get into the tasting notes and see what we get. Okay. Now, for me... I'm getting a massive amount. It's like... It's a big old sherry bomb. But I'm getting some kind of citrusy notes from it as well, which is really, really interesting. I'm not really sure where that's coming from. It's got quite a sharp nose on it. It's very, very acrid, very tannic, deep raisins, bit of figs. Wow, I mean, that is hot. I mean, I drink a lot of whiskey, and that is hot and spicy. It's almost like I'm drinking something rye. Now, so you do get those kind of like those deep raisins, those kind of fig elements, those dried fruits, sultanas, all that lot coming into that, as you would expect from something like this. Immediately, you're getting a whole heap of like white pepper, but it's almost like it's stronger than that. It's that sort of flavour profile, that kind of like tingly spiciness, but it isn't quite chilly. But the ABV on it is stonking. Woof. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. Okay, I mean, that's a really interesting lineup, that is, because I wouldn't say largely I enjoyed any of them, particularly in terms of my personal flavour profiles. I think you guys out there would probably enjoy the Glenfarclas the most, mainly because people tend to be kind of whiskey, like sherry influenced whiskey drinkers, and that doesn't tend to be me. In terms of my favourite, going back through them quickly, I think it might well be in the first one. I think it might well have been the Glen Mhor, which is really interesting. Going for a non-cleansing taste through. So it's a subtle way of picking up the differences between drams. Yeah, I think for me, the Glen Mhor followed closely by the Glenfarclas, but again, none of them will be my pick. The Scapa tends to be obviously the cheapest one there, but I'm not really sure about these two. These two didn't really do anything for me. So yeah, interesting little lineup for sure. Great to try these things from the 80s and 70s, which is insane, and an 8-year-old whiskey at that. Stuff that you just wouldn't be able to get hold of, generally speaking. But again, reinforces the fact that getting some samples at auction might not be a bad call. And again, I'm going to say on these videos probably every time, but if I'm not sure how much Mark spent on each of these, but let's say they were sort of 20-25 quid, and you saw, you know, an 8-year-old from a distillery that's long closed, a dram of it or a double for 30-35 quid, you might take a punt when you're out and about. So why not at an auction with a sample size and just roll a dice and see what you get, especially if you've trying to reach a shipping limit or something like that. Yeah, I don't think it's a bad call. But again, yeah, really interesting to try these ones. Not really for me, but them's the breaks. I'll see you again on more Sample Saturday videos coming forward, and get onto my Discord if you want to have a little vote about which ones I do next. See you soon.